story. And that is the big, unmissable theme of the week. 2 years ago, a very brave woman called Yeonmi Park escaped from North Korea. And she wrote a memoir of her experience, which she called In Order to Live. She was quoting from an American writer called Joan Didion, who once said, "We tell stories in order to live." For Yeonmi Park, writing this book, telling this story, was a way for her to unburden herself, to tell the truth about what North Korea is like, to let the world know. And she wrote this about her experience of writing the book. "As soon as I decided to tell my secret, I felt free for the first time ever. It was like a heavy sky had been pushing down on me, pinning me to the earth. And now it was lifted, and I could breathe again." We are always telling ourselves stories and telling others stories. Stories are how we make sense of our experiences and expectations. And this week, like Angus said, the Christian Union are interested in your story. We want to share stories. We'd love to hear where you're coming from and why, what's gone into your story. And we love to share our story, and especially how what we found in Jesus has set us free, made sense of life, delivered on our deepest longings. And as we start this lunchtime, we're going to think about one of the most popular stories there is, the story that we are only matter, that it really is all sound and fury, signifying nothing, that the randomness of the cosmos, time, matter, and chance, applies to how our universe developed, how life was formed on our earth, and that we are not immune from that. However convincing the illusion, that is all we are. In an interview, Stephen Hawking put it like this: "The human race is just a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet, orbiting around a very average star in the outer suburb of one among 100 billion galaxies. We are so insignificant that I can't believe the whole universe exists for our benefit." Now, to make sense of who we are in life, every one of us needs to answer certain big story questions. Where am I from? Where am I going? What am I for? And this story, that we are only matter, has answers to all of those questions. Where have I come from? Nowhere. A blind process of natural selection over millions of years has produced this, for no other purpose than survival and genetic replication. Where am I going? Nowhere particular. Speaking as an individual, death is the end. And as for the earth, the universe as we know it, entropy guarantees that however long it takes, everything will cool, everything will dissipate. What am I for? Well, that's up to me, I guess. And I should enjoy it while it lasts, whatever that means. Now, that is a story I've heard many times over. It's a story that does have its own particular thrills, and I used to believe it. But this lunchtime, I want us to ask together, is that a true story? Is that the whole story of your world? Is that the whole story of you? And since we tell stories in order to live, what kind of life is possible if that is the true story, the whole story of you? The comedian and composer Tim Minchin put it like this in a graduation speech. He said, "Art degrees are awesome. They help you find meaning where there is none. And let me assure you, there is none. Don't go looking for it. Searching for meaning is like searching for a rhyme scheme in a cookbook. You won't find it, and you'll bugger up your souffle." More recently, Ricky Gervais was on a late-night comedy show hosted by a man called Stephen Colbert. And Stephen Colbert asked Ricky Gervais the big metaphysical question: why is there something rather than nothing? And Gervais said back, "That makes no sense at all. Surely the biggest question is not why, but how. Why is irrelevant, isn't it?" Minchin, Gervais, and many others are clear. There is no meaning to be found. The why question is nonsense. Why is irrelevant? I suppose I'm asking this lunchtime, do you think that? Is the why question irrelevant? Now, I actually agree with Tim Minchin that arts degrees are awesome, and as part of my literature degree, I got to read a fantastic book called If This Is a Man, written by Primo Levi. I hope some of you have read it. It's brilliant. And it's a harrowing and brutal account of his time in Auschwitz. And in that harrowing and brutal place, he tells us, near the start of the book, an episode about his entry into the camp. He saw an icicle dangling from a window ledge, and he thought it was beautiful, so he grabbed it and took it. But when one of the guards saw that he did this, the guard snatched the icicle away, snapped it in two, and then shattered it on the ground. And stunned by this cruelty, Levi asked him, "Warum? Why?" And the guard said in response, "Hier ist kein Warum. Here, there is no why." Fundamental to the dehumanizing project of Auschwitz was stripping away meaning from the prisoners, making the question, why, off limits. And what made that so effective is that asking that kind of question is intrinsic to our humanity. From an incredibly early age, human beings discover the power of that uncomfortable question, why? So as we think about this story that we are only matter, I want us to ask a few maybe uncomfortable why questions about it. Here's the first one. If that's the whole story of who we are, only matter, why should we trust what we know? In that story, the processes by which we come to understand reality are, we believe, nothing more than evolved survival strategies. So why on earth would we trust what we know if how we know is nothing more than an evolutionary offcut? If there really is nothing more than chemistry bubbling away up here, why would I trust what these senses tell me to give me a read on reality? The co-discoverer of DNA, Francis Crick, once famously declared this. Try not to take it personally. You, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behaviour of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. Ouch. To which the theoretical physicist John Polkinghorne replied like this: if Crick's thesis is true, we could never know it, for it destroys rationality. Thought is replaced by electrochemical neural events. The very assertions of the reductionist himself are nothing but blips in the neural network of his brain. The world of rational discourse dissolves into the absurd chatter of firing synapses. In order to make the assertion that all that we are is matter, we end up relying on non-material things. We posit as realities reason and logic, things we cannot touch. Take those away, and we undermine ourselves as thinkers and knowers. In his book, Lord Jim, Joseph Conrad writes about an encounter between Marlowe, the narrator, and Stein, who's a butterfly collector. And Stein, speaking in his broken English, says this as he looks at a butterfly on a dung heap. This magnificent butterfly finds a little heap of dirt and sits still on it. But man, he will never on his heap of mud keep still. He wants to be so, and again he wants to be so. He wants to be a saint, and he wants to be a devil, and every time he shuts his eyes, he sees himself as a very fine fellow, so fine as he can never be. And because you cannot always keep your eyes shut, there comes the real trouble, the heart pain, the world pain. Why all our angst? Why the gap between who I am with my eyes shut and who I am with my eyes open? Why do I find myself asking these questions? To quote the French-Romanian playwright Eugene Ionesco, what a farce, what a snare, what a booby trap, we were born cheated. For if we are not to know, if there is nothing to know, why do we have this longing to know? If I'm only matter, do I even matter? Well, how could I? Not in any way outside the four walls of my opinion and experience. And even if I matter to a few other people, and not everyone has that privilege, they too will join me in death one day. That's a story that can't satisfy us, can't make self of itself, can't make sense of our experiences or our longing to know. So this lunchtime, I want to say, don't accept a definition of you that leaves you powerless to understand yourself, that deprives you of the kind of vocabulary you need to talk about your experiences, that means you can't understand the world you're in. What do we need? We need a voice from outside the world of circumstance, who can speak to us and give us a bigger story. Let me put it like this. This is from an Anglo-Saxon record of King Edwin's counsel. King Edwin had been considering the Christian faith, and he'd asked his courtiers for advice, and one of them said this: "The present life of man seems to me like the swift flight of a lone sparrow through the banqueting hall where you sit in the winter months to dine. Inside there's a comforting fire to warm the room. Outside, the wintry storms of snow and rain are raging. While he's inside, he's safe from the winter storms. But after a few moments of comfort, he vanishes from sight into the darkness whence he came. Similarly, man appears on earth for a little while, but we know nothing of what went before this life and what follows. What we need is a voice from outside, someone who can tell us a bigger story, big enough and true enough to make sense of who we are." And the reason why King Edwin's court and many millions since have been drawn to the story of Jesus is that he claims to be exactly that. Though a figure in history, he claims to speak as the voice from outside. And as we get towards question times, let me quote from an early eyewitness source about Jesus' life. It's called John's Gospel, and most of you have it around you. Let me read from the very beginning. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Out of his fullness, we've received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in the closest relationship with the Father, has made him known." Those are the opening bars to another story. One that offers satisfying responses to our why questions. That's been my experience of it. One that makes sense of them and so can make sense of us. And this story tells us that at the heart of reality is this figure called the Word, who was with God and who was God, who made all things. And this figure became flesh, God becoming a human being, the maker of all matter, choosing to inhabit a material existence as one of us. And for him, that is a humbling step down. But for us, that is an electrifying statement of our dignity. Because in this story, you matter that much. He chooses to come and be with you. To go back to that Hawking quote from the beginning, of course, the whole universe doesn't exist for our benefit. But the one for whom it does exist values us this much. Jesus presents himself as the author of reality, writing himself into the story as one of his own creation. And no other religion makes a claim as audacious as that. And if it's true, of course, it raises all kinds of questions. But it also means that the true story of you is so much bigger than only matter, so much bigger than chemical scum. It means that you're right to trust your reason as you explore this wonderful universe in which you live. It means you're right to take other human beings seriously and see the way they are treated as a matter of huge, even infinite importance. It means you're right to long for more than this world, even at its very best, seems able to give. Jesus steps onto the world stage with an extraordinary and history-changing offer of love. He claims to speak as a voice from outside, and if he is the one he claims to be, then he is able to tell us the whole story about ourselves. And that's not an assertion you have to just accept blindly. This historical figure invites you to investigate him, to weigh the evidence for his claim and see where it leads, to look at the impact this man had on history and judge for yourself what kind of man he really was.